You're listening to WCAT Radio, your home for authentic Catholic programming.
Welcome to the Catholic Mama, where you'll learn how to deepen and defend your faith, find comfort as we share the vocation of parenthood, and learn how to raise your children confidently Catholic. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn. Let's get started. Hello, and welcome to the Catholic Mama podcast. I'm your host, Christine Mooney-Flynn, and I'm joined today by my once-a-week counterpart host, Pat Flynn.
Hello.
Hello. We're back again.
Always a joy, yes.
It's been this week, the first week of Lent.
Mm-hmm.
How are you feeling?
Pretty good. Lent, we were talking about this yesterday, I think always invites an extra layer, if not an extra 10 layers of spiritual warfare. And this is something I was talking with my friend, Levi. I've got a little Catholic accountability group. And we always notice this, the same thing, that whenever you do, make moves to grow more in love and closer to God, be on the lookout. Be on the lookout. There's an enemy that will do everything that he can to thwart that. So you should always expect resistance in the spiritual life to the extent that you're really living the spiritual life. So, part of me wants to say, great, it's Lent, right? But another part would say, yeah, it's challenging. It's always very, very difficult. There are nefarious forces at work. There really are. But to me, that's a sign that I'm moving more I'm going in the right direction. So in that sense, good.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yesterday in confession, Father said, as we draw closer to God during Lent, there is an enemy who will try to pull us away. And if you're feeling, if anybody listening is feeling, even leading up to Lent, as you start to prepare for Lent, think about what you're going to do. This could have started weeks ago.
Right.
If you're feeling resistance, it's there is somebody, some horrible creature out there trying to pull you away from God. So keep at it. Go to confession. Go to adoration. Take the Eucharist. Mm-hmm. And don't be discouraged by any hardship that you might be experiencing throughout the course of this liturgical season.
Right, and these hardships are ultimately purifying. It's very important that God keeps the devil on a leash. So if you're being tempted, if you're being challenged, there's opportunity there. So seek out that opportunity. Lean into God, pray, keep availing yourself of the sacraments. And by God's grace, you will get there. So
yeah, and we've talked about this. Mm-hmm. Any suffering that is in the world or anybody feels personally, God allows that to happen because He knows that some good can come of it. So our sanctification comes from these daily troubles that we might experience. So, yeah, okay,
indeed. And it's important also to note that God is omniscient. We are not. God sees how everything plays out, so there's oftentimes in our lives where we don't know what the good is. In fact, that's a lot of the time. We don't know what the opportunity is.
How many times you look back and you're like, oh, now I see it. No. But you might never, in this life anyway.
Yeah, because, again, we don't have the full perspective. But here's what we do know. We do know that God is all good, and we do know that God is omniscient. So we know that God has His reasons, even if we don't know what those reasons are. And that's important to keep in mind. Because that keeps you rooted, it keeps you firm, it helps you with the virtue of hope, right? Hope is that fighter's virtue, the boxer's virtue, and that's why when we're in the beatific vision in heaven, hope goes away. We won't need that anymore, but we need it now. So,
yep. And if somebody is struggling during Lent or at other times, how they struggle might be different will be different than another person.
Oh, yes.
So I've noticed that I've been, I don't want to say doubtful, cautious towards diving deeper into my faith. Because I started praying, I'll talk more about this in a few weeks, but I started praying the full rosary every day, 20 decades. Mm-hmm. And I've been very caught. At first I was like, I don't know, that's a lot of time. Can I do it? Maybe I shouldn't even bother. I'll think about it. And then I kind of got jolted out of that mindset and it's just like, no, we're all in. We're going to commit to this. And by the grace of God, it's not what I thought it was going to be. The fear that I had. But I got to tell you, I don't know. I don't think that was my own nervousness coming through. I think that was the devil playing to my personal worries of, I don't have a lot of time anyway, because I'm a mom of 4 kids. I got a lot going on. And just like that seed of doubt or cautiousness about what I would agree to or commit to. I don't think that was
the good team.
Yeah, it wasn't from the good team. Isn't that interesting though?
It's very interesting. And I think it's just important to emphasize, like, we are in the midst of an incredible war, of this incredible spiritual warfare. And this is real, and this is happening. So there's often many aspects of living the Catholic life that are quite terrifying when properly understood. Like, this is not some like happy-go-lucky rainbows and unicorn festival. It's just not.
I'd like to go to that.
Yeah, that sounds fine, and I think we will probably get a taste of that in the hereafter. I don't know if it'll be unicorn specifically, but again, there's nothing that we should expect. What does Scripture teach? What does the Church teach? That we are in a period of trial, that we are saved, yes, but that salvation, and we'll talk about this in a future episode when we talk about the doctrine of good works, is a process. That we are saved, have been saved, are being saved, and will be saved. And St. Paul says, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. And we have to lean into God, trust God, but God is here to turn us inside out, to root out the sin that is within us so that we may fully partake in the divine life. And that is like, that sounds all hunky-dory, and ultimately it is, until you think about this is like 14 million times worse than getting a root canal on a spiritual. It's a spiritual root canal, and people don't think of it that way. That's an analogy that C.S. Lewis uses. I forget in which book. Maybe it's Mere Christianity, but your parents send you to the dentist. You go to the dentist because in one, in a sense, it's like if you don't go to the dentist, you're in big trouble. But sometimes, it doesn't mean it's always going to be pleasant. And I think that that's something to keep in mind, that this process of purgation, this purgative process, comes with immense challenges for all of us. And sometimes it doesn't get talked about enough. But I know, we're married. We know each other. We know we go through that all the time. And it's for our own good. And I look back through all these challenges in my life and becoming Catholic. So I often say that becoming Catholic was the single greatest thing that ever happened to me, and the single most challenging thing that's happened to me. And we've both seen how it's transformed our lives. But that transformation was never easy. It really did involve a spiritual root canal, and that's still going on. I'm not out of God's dentist chair yet. None of us are. So yeah, there's great comfort. Of course, knowing that God is at work in us and that He wills for everybody to be saved. But there is something that gives me the shakes every now and then when I think about the trials I'm going through and the trials that I will have to go through, as all the saints have.
That's right.
There's your motivational speech.
It's hard, and it ain't gonna end anytime soon. If you hear any, we have a little snuffling pig, otherwise known as a 4-month-old baby, on the bed next to us. So I always feel like I have to say this. If you're a first-time listener, it's not me or it's not some weird noise in the background. It's just a baby. So I feel like I always have to remind people of that.
People are going to think you have a condition.
One time I did a workout video, and you recorded it for me. It was many years ago, and you had some kind of like asthmatic episode. And then as I'm done with the video, I was like, was your breathing too heavy on the video? No, it's fine.
Yeah.
And it sounds awful. And I got I put it up on YouTube back when I was a fitness blogger. And I got a lot of nasty comments from people being mean about better quality. This is a free workout video. It should have been better.
Yeah. Anyway.
All right. Wow. First, okay, so we talked about Lent and spiritual warfare. What else is there to talk about?
Catholic manhood.
The Catholic manhood. Yeah. So before we dive into this particular topic, this will be next week. We are going to immediately turn around and talk about Catholic womanhood.
Awesome.
But I know you are very passionate about bringing masculinity back to the Catholic man.
Right.
And you have exemplified this, I think, in our lives.
I do try.
Yeah, you've done a very good
God's
job.
Grace.
Yeah, seriously. You were a man-child before.
Yes.
Yes.
Boy man.
Yeah, boy. You're a little Mowgli running around.
Yeah, for sure.
So God, I can say, has positively transformed you in many ways, and myself, of course. But as far as the Catholic man goes, I'm not a Catholic man. But I've enjoyed the benefits of this transformation. So let's talk a little bit about what that means exactly.
Yeah, and it's unfortunate. We live in a time where we hear these terms of like toxic masculinity and all this stuff. And I'll agree with a lot of it. We live in an absolutely debased culture, and there's not just toxic masculinity. There's toxic femininity as well. It's both of them.
Carrie Grass.
It's just toxic humanity. It's
toxic
just
humanity.
It's just sin, right?
I'll say real quick. If you haven't read Carrie Gress, she's a Catholic author, very intelligent woman, and she was on the podcast a while back to talk about toxic femininity. So men get all the flack as being the root cause of all this terribleness in today's society. Ain't so. It is. It's just sin. So there is toxic masculinity. There's toxic femininity, toxic humanity.
And they feed each other.
They sure do.
That's what people need to understand. And so much of what's perverse about feminism is that it wanted to take what was the worst qualities of men, the most sinful qualities of men, and have women imitate them, right? And it's utterly bizarre why you would want that. No, like those qualities of men are the worst, right? Like when men are pigs, when they're promiscuous, when they treat women as sexual objects, that is toxic. I'm 1,000% on board with condemning that. Why then would we ever want to have anybody, let alone women, imitate this behavior, right? We want to rein that behavior in. So rather than get into the whole modern political debate of is it toxic masculinity or femininity, it's both. It's toxic. It's sin run rampant in a culture that has lost its moral foundations. So rather than focus on the negative, perhaps we focus on the positive. And of course, the Catholic Church and the Church's teachings on faith and morals has a ton to say about this. So since we are married, we'll probably talk mostly in the context of marriage and what a husband's duties are to his wife. How a husband as the head of the household should behave, how he should be that Christian model, specifically for his children. And yeah, we can just, how's that sound?
Sounds good.
Good. Okay. So why don't we just start from, I think, the old Catholic Catechism, paragraph 1616. And I think this really sums up a man's role, specifically a husband's role. And maybe we should do an episode differently of how men who are not yet husbands should. I mean, a lot of it's obviously going to be similar. It's not like you're going to swap out virtues for vices whether you're single or married, but there's specific roles that a husband has, sure, obviously. And I was going to say, if you're a single man, I would imagine that just as if you don't have, there's spiritual motherhood, there's spiritual fatherhood in a sense. So I would imagine that you would tend towards those roles. Right. I mean, the virtues are the virtues: prudence, justice, fortitude, temperance. Making sure that you are living your life in imitation of Christ. That's what it really comes down to here.
But who it applies to is slightly different.
Yeah, and how it applies in your roles as a man may differ depending on whether you're married or you're not. But let's start with what Apostle Paul makes clear when he says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her, that he might sanctify her." And then he adds, "For this reason a man shall leave his father and mother and be joined to his wife, and the two shall become one. This is a great mystery," and I mean in reference to Christ and the church. Okay, so if we unpack this, I think this is a perfect initial roadmap. Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her. So Christ is the head of the church, as the husband is the head of the household. But what do we mean by that? We don't mean a domineering leader. It's not just somebody who, in an arbitrary way, it's just whatever he says goes. Yes, there's authority there, and this is a traditional Catholic marriage where the husband is the head of the household. But it's a self-sacrificial leader. That the husband's role, to love your wife. Now, what does love mean in Christianity and Catholicism? Agape, to will the good of the other. My job as a husband is to get you and the kids to heaven. That is my husbandly duty. And to love somebody is to will what is good for somebody. But to will what is good for somebody, we have to know what is that something's proper end? What is that something for? What is it about human nature that can be perfected? What causes human nature to flourish? Now, on a proximate level, there's living a moral life, a life of virtue, which we talked about. But God gave us something extra. He gave us the supernatural gift of eternal life and a beatific vision. And that is the proper end for humans, to get to the beatific vision, to have eternal friendship with God. So when husbands love your wives, my goal is to help assist and facilitate your, Christine's, salvation, as well as the children's, and to do whatever I can and everything that I can to facilitate that, and to be that self-sacrificial leader, to give myself completely for the good of my wife and my children. And this is obviously beneficial in every direction, because when somebody gives of themselves, they increase in charity and love. They become more Christ-like. They become more God-like. So it's sanctifying for me, the husband, to help sanctify my wife and my children. As I help them to grow in holiness, I grow in holiness. This is the incredible power of love, that when you perform these acts of self-giving and self-sacrifice, it's not only good for everybody else, but it's good for you. And I think that's one of the best ways to initially understand the role of the husband. And a proper manhood, a proper masculinity, is not self-serving, right? It's not about who can I use to get what I want, right? We love people and we use things. It's how can I give of myself to help my family in achieving their proper end of attaining salvation with God.
Right, and that how you go about your daily life is completely transformed when you have that in mind.
Yes. Now, what does that look like on a daily basis? Well, one is that a husband plays a very important role, and here we can go to the Roman Catechism, which specifically outlines a lot of this. It has the duties of married people and the duties of a husband and the duties of a wife. So why don't we start with this, and then I'll maybe add some more personal notes.
Sure.
So it is the duty of the husband to treat his wife generously and honorably, right? So we're not saying, hey, the wife is just some piece of property, use her however he wants. No, I have a role to treat you, I have to be generous to you, and I have to honor your dignity and help you get to heaven. It should not be forgotten that Eve was called by Adam his companion. The husband should also be constantly occupied in some pursuit with a view to provide necessities for the support of his family and to avoid idleness, the root of almost every vice. I am here to support my family. I am the provider. By nature, that's what man is oriented at. So it's good for husbands to go out and to provide and not be idle for the family.
And also make sure, too, that when the husband is home, he is not acting as a child. Correct. Right? Serious pursuits, not just not wanting to be a parent or a husband wanting to regress into some kind of adult childhood is also important.
And that goes to the idea of modeling. So yes, when the husband is home, we'll talk about this more in a minute. Everything matters and everything is important. Just keep that in mind. It doesn't mean you can never leisure or watch sports or this or that. But obviously there's some activities that are exceedingly puerile. That if they're not outright mortal sins, you got to figure how I'm speaking and how I'm behaving. What direction is it pointed at? What is the trend of this speaking and behavior? Not just any act in itself. Is it pulling me closer to God in love and knowledge? Is it unifying my family, or is it making me somehow stupid and childlike? We'll come back to that. Unless you wanted to add something.
Real quick, because I'm remembering and I'll probably forget in a minute. Growing up, I had a friend whose father would not go to church on Sundays. He'd stay in his pajamas, lay on the couch, and watch sports. Mm-hmm. And then, but he was always saying, do as I say, not as I do. And he thought it was really funny. But I'll tell you, even as kids, we knew that was a load of crap.
and look, we know statistically that kids will do as they do, not as they say, and that the father is the hinge point. He really is the foundation of the faith for the kids. That if the father is devout and devout by practicing, like it's visible, it's apparent, and he's living a life of faith, it's somewhere around 90% likelihood that his children will remain in the faith and be devout themselves, where it's the reverse. If the father is not devout, is not apparently practicing and sincere in his faith, that the children it's a 90% chance that they won't remain in the faith. So this is serious business, the role of the father. And obviously having a devout mom helps, but the data is there. It's the dad that really matters. All right, so pursuits matter, quality pursuits, both to provide for your family and what you do with your free time. We'll come back to that. But last part here from the Council of Trent, the Catechism of the Council of Trent, that the husband is to keep all his family in order, to correct their morals, and see that they faithfully discharge their duties. So husbands, you have a role to not just teach the faith, but to make sure that your family is living a Christian life, that they are living a moral life, that they're not falling into sin, that they understand what the moral life is, that they have preferably a robust understanding of the moral framework of Christianity, why it is what it is, understanding that this is a blueprint for flourishing, right? That as rational animals, we're meant to use reason to seek what is really good for us. What is really good for us is eternal life with God, and God has given us the blueprint. He's given us the blueprint in multiple ways, through the commandments, through the Beatitudes, through the example and life of Christ, but also the natural law itself, traditional natural law. So we can figure out what the moral life is through both divine revelation and epistemologically through the natural laws written on our hearts by using reason as well. And the Catholic Church obviously has always defended and promoted the natural law, but God gives us that extra help. He super adds to it through divine revelation, specifically through both the Old and New Testament.
So, as a formerly progressive feminist, this paragraph would have made me want to vomit years ago. But I will say, and I bought in to a lot of, men, chivalry is only you put pearls on a pig or whatever, saying like, oh, men are being gentle to women because they want to oppress us. They're opening that door because they're subconsciously thinking that you're not strong enough to do it yourself. Mm-hmm. So now I had gotten, oh wow, you hear that? We've got a happy baby, very active happy baby around us. So I had already moved away from that sort of toxic thinking over time, but it was still, after years of internalizing this idea that a man has no right to tell me as a woman if I've made a mistake. That was a big one. How dare you, I think, is something that I used to very commonly say. Mm-hmm. But of course I could dare to criticize Pat all I wanted to. Right. Mm-hmm. So it was this, if you are moving, and what I'm trying to say, if you were as a wife or a woman trying to move into a traditional Catholic marriage, there may be some lingering issues of your former belief system or your past that may rear its ugly head during all of this. But I will say 100% that in fulfilling our roles, as Pat is fulfilling his duties of a husband, mm-hmm. And I am now fulfilling my duties as a Catholic wife, which we will talk about more in the next episode. 100% I can say that my former angry feminist self was wrong, and our lives have been incredibly blessed and grace-filled since.
Absolutely. And when you see this working, certainly when you experience it, it's one thing, but you can see how when the duties, when the moral obligations are fulfilled, you can see how this is mutually harmonious, mutually beneficial, and not just mutually, for the entire family structure, right? And that the ordering here is really a really beautiful thing that facilitates a quality and type of love that is truly reflective of Christ's love for his church as well.
And not to say, of course, we've both slipped up in our duties as Catholic husband and Catholic wife since we've started on this endeavor. So again, as speaking from the Catholic wife perspective, suffering is not a bad thing. So if we need to, as God forgives us, we also need to be very forgiving towards our husbands as they're learning to navigate this role, if this is something new for them as well.
And that's why we have the sacrament of confession for all of us. We're all going to slip up. We imitate Christ, but we always fall short. Right. And that's why we always, go back to the fundamentals. We go back to prayer. We go back to reading scripture and the catechism. We go back to confession. We avail ourselves as frequently as possible of the Eucharist to have God's grace to help us discharge our duties faithfully. That's what the catechism affirms. So the husband has to, again, the modeling is so important. As a man, I can't expect that my children will discharge their duties if they don't see me discharging mine. Especially towards you, right? That they need to see me honoring you and treating you with as much love as I can, and living myself a life of Christian virtue, of living the moral life, of not lying, of showing temperance and fortitude and justice and prudence. And again, we all make mistakes. We all admit that within the family. That always happens. And when I do make mistakes, I not only ask for God's forgiveness, but my family's forgiveness as well. And I think that is an important modeling aspect also. But I take this very seriously, as seriously as I can, because this is part of the salvific process, my role as a husband. And I see that, right? In being a husband, I can see how living the Catholic life has made me become less egotistical, less superficial. As I've had to give more of myself to you and the kids, I have felt and experienced this incredible transformation, and I can see the wisdom of God why he would set up this role, because it has broken down so much of my superficiality and egoism and narcissism and self-interest. And it has not only, I think, made our family healthier, it has taken our marriage to an entirely new level.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about some advice to give to husbands who are trying to start to live this life if they're not already?
Yes. One is study. Read the Catechism. Be very clear on what is expected of a husband. So study Scripture, study tradition, and also surround yourself with other good Catholic men. I mean, that's your environment matters. So, my pool of friends now are, like I said, I had my little accountability group. One of my best friends is exceedingly, now he's not a husband, but he lives an exceedingly virtuous Catholic life, and he's always striving towards holiness. So having other friends that are Catholic and share these values is really important. Now that's not easy to find, and this goes back to Aristotle. Hold on, let's get the baby up here. Okay, that baby was really excited. But we're back now. So we were saying that this goes back to Aristotle. He talks about virtuous friendship, the highest form of friendship, where friends really care about the good of the other. And he also rightfully notes that this is the rarest form of friendship. So you don't expect everybody to be necessarily a virtuous friend, right? There's sometimes like utilitarian friendships and acquaintances, but strive to find those virtuous friends and to be a virtuous friend as a Catholic man. You need that brotherhood. And
that'll evolve over time. It's not like you're suddenly going to have this circle. You have to develop it. And you might notice that if you have friends with more toxic behaviors that aren't doing anything to help with your flourishing, and you can't seem to help them with their flourishing, mm-hmm. That as you fill up your social circle with more virtuous friendships, those may just need to fall away.
Yeah, and they become mission work, but they aren't there in the sense that they were before, right? And that's just necessary. That's part of the Christian Catholic life. Your environment matters very much. Okay, men, what should we do? What are some good things? Well, have a strong prayer life. Make sure that your kids see that you are taking your faith extremely seriously. And again, it's not just for your kids. It's absolutely 100% for you as well. So have a structured prayer routine. Whatever that is, just make sure that you're doing it. There's many options there. You can start with something simple, something that I use, especially if you're somebody who's got a bit of monkey brain and you need some reining in, is the app Hallow. There's a wonderful Catholic prayer and meditation app called Hallow. And I think that's a great start if you just need to have something a little guided, a little structured in the mornings to get you going. I recently got this really very beautiful home desk altar with candles, and that's just been a really nice addition to my morning prayers. Getting to Mass as frequently as possible. Obviously, fulfilling the Sunday obligation is a no-brainer, but can you get to Mass more than that? I understand people are busy or doing things, but again, these acts of sacrifice, taking up your cross, following Christ, really matter. So trying to get to Mass, if not daily Mass, at least a couple more times a week.
What about your Catholic men's group? The morning one. And also noting the age. Okay, I was going to say.
Yeah, I got a long list here.
Oh, okay. All right. I'll be quiet then. I'll let you go.
So get ready. We're going to man up. Starting at the fundamentals, getting to regular confession, at least monthly confession. Try to get to Mass more than once a week. Let's just set like a baseline minimum here, but where more is clearly better. Daily Mass, I would recommend. Then prayer life. Okay, these are the fundamentals of Christian life. Prayer, sacraments, got it. Good. Okay, on top of that, a Catholic men's study group, Bible group, which you're talking about. I've been going since we moved here. That was one of the first things I looked for because I knew how important this was. That I searched around and I was very fortunate. I found one pretty early on, and it is a fantastic group. It's been growing. We have really good conversation, not just about Scripture and the teachings of the church, but also a place where we can bring our struggles to other men who love God, who understand their faith, and can really provide advice, assistance, value from a man's perspective. So find some type of men's group. Again, even just once a week is good. We also have one that is pretty much every other week. It's not just a men's group, but it's a Catholic study group where we get together. And this is for me, that's fun leisure too. Like this is leisure where we go out to a local pub, and we have fraternity, and we study something. We just finished Augustine's Confessions, for example. Mm-hmm. We're going to be doing something different next. So that's really good as well. And that a lot of your leisure can, and I would argue should, center around your Catholic faith. That's super enjoyable to me. We're doing something both intellectual and fun.
So, can I jump in real quick?
Yes, of course.
I know that most of the men that you have encountered in these, as you first walk into a men's group, are many decades older than you. And I just want to say that for men or women, if you wind up being able, especially if you are a stay-at-home mom, you may find that some of the activities at your church that are available to you during the day are going to be filled with retirees. And the same, the men who can show up at a 6:30 a.m. Men's group may be more likely to be in their older years. That is a good thing. Don't shy away if you walk into a group and you are younger. You can bring friends in.
I will say that was exactly my experience. That's why when I first joined this group, it was probably about 7 to 10 guys. And I would say all of them were double my age, at least, all of them. Now we're up to about 20. And it's pretty evenly matched. Now, there's some people who are younger than me. Now, I think another point of this is again, man up, be the person who invites people. And that's what I did. I just started inviting more people and younger people. I said, hey, there's this group. It's early, but I know, because I'm a creeper, I know you don't have to be at work till 7:30, so it seems like it fits in your schedule. Let's go. So you can be a little bit pushy about it. And I have, and you're not going to get everyone, but you'll get some. And
then no matter the age gap, I mean, if you are younger or if you're older, you're going to help others, and you will be helped by hearing from different perspectives of different ages, what different struggles, a man who's been a father and has their children grown will have a different perspective.
Absolutely.
You'll be able to bring your own perspective as somebody who's living that young fatherhood, if that is where you are.
Mm-hmm. Avail yourself of their experience.
Yeah, exactly. And then also there's a lot of Catholic young adult groups for 20s and 30s somethings in a lot of areas. So also look for that too.
Great. So yes, having a good men's group. Okay, what else should men do? Don't eat like a toddler. Eat like a man. Eat healthy, nutritious food and show temperance. Don't be snacking on, little treats and bowls of cereal in the morning. I think it's a little embarrassing. Eat like an adult. Eat like an adult. I'm not saying you have to follow any specific diet, but show temperance in your eating regimen.
Years ago, I worked at Starbucks, and as Starbucks became, this was like when they were first starting to explode, and you could find one on every corner. But I did notice there was a time where grown men would come in and just order a coffee. And then as Starbucks became more prolific and their advertising seemed to be working, men would slowly start to have more infantile-like drinks. Their coffee was now half coffee, fill the rest of the cup up with whipped cream. Well, and these small things, like you just become accustomed to treating yourself.
Gluttonous.
It's gluttonous, yeah. Gluttonous. So, and this goes for women too. I mean, temperance. Temperance is just well, it's for everybody, but adults need to model it for their children. And as we're talking about men should do that as well.
It's not just a health issue. It's a virtue. Again, temperance, breaking free of these material dependencies, of the temptations of the flesh, which are many, and making sure we're focused on what matters most. So yeah, it's not it's not just a health issue. It is a health issue for many people, but you also have a moral obligation to care for your body, to make sure that you are respecting this gift that God has given us, and to care for yourself. So there's health reasons and there's virtuous reasons. Take your diet. Again, doesn't mean that you can't ever enjoy yourself. As Catholics, we have our feasts. We love our feasts. But if on a regular day your diet resembles that of like a 3-year-old, which I would argue 3-year-olds shouldn't be eating like that either, right? Then time to make some changes. Exercise, be physically active. Strength train, go to the gym. Again, you don't have to be a professional bodybuilder or power lifter or any of that, but show that you're willing to challenge yourself. Again, now we're talking about fortitude, that you're willing to undergo certain periods of stress to care for your body and to promote your own flourishing. And again, be that good model for your kids. So take your dieting, take your physical exercise seriously. Care for your body is what we're saying. That is a virtuous thing to do. Don't become but there's another extreme. So it's important with virtues. We understand that the virtue is always the golden mean between excess and deficiency. So courage, for example, is that moral sweet spot between being a reckless fool and being a coward. So same thing, people can take fitness too far and dieting too far where they become obsessed with themselves. They become narcissists about their body image. And that's obviously very unhealthy too. So we want to find that sweet middle ground where we understand that God gave us this gift of corporeality, of that we are material beings, and that's a wonderful, good thing. And that part of our flourishing means taking care of our material bodies as well. So eating healthy, exercising regularly, very important, very manlike, very manly. So definitely do that as well. And again, it's kind of easy to figure out, how you should act by just thinking, how would I want my kids to act, right? And it just kind of falls in line. Would you want your kids to eat healthy? Yeah, of course. Would you want your kids to have a regular exercise routine? Yeah, of course. Would you want your kids to have a strong prayer life? Yeah, of course. Would you want your kids to go to mass regularly? Yeah, of course. Would you want your kids to go to confession? Yeah, of course. Would you want your kids to be generous and treat their wives or honorably? Yeah, of course. Like it's a lot of this is so obvious, right? So just man up and start doing this stuff. Do you want your kids to lie? No, I never want my kids. Okay, then don't lie yourself. Don't lie to your kids. Never lie to your kids. Always be truthful. Again, the purpose of speech, the proper end of speech is to communicate truth. So anytime you're lying, you're perverting that faculty. And anytime you pervert a faculty, you're performing an immoral act. That's what comes out of traditional natural law. Same thing, we can go through any human faculties, including the sexual faculty as well. So we'll save that for another episode, however. I think that's a general sketch of how to be, how to embody a Catholic masculinity.
And just start with something and add it in. Mm-hmm. Take something out. Whatever you need to do. I mean, you don't have to flip a switch and do all this tomorrow, but you should have a plan and get going on it. Yes. Don't waffle. Now's the perfect time for it. It's Lent.
Lent is the perfect time.
Right? Get it? You have a set time period where you were supposed to increase our holiness. That increase should continue as we leave Lent. It doesn't revert back to its old self. We don't revert back to our old selves on Easter Sunday. So now is the time.
And this is very important. This is very important. Sincerely ask God to help you do this.
Yes.
Right? That we need God's grace to get this done.
All these things ask and you shall receive.
All these things I've done in my life, I have not done by my own power, but I sincerely have cooperated with God's grace and wanted God to transform me. And that's what makes it possible. That's what makes it possible. You can't do it on your own. Nobody can. So that's really important. So before you start doing this, and like Christine said, Lent is a perfect time to start making these changes. Spend time in prayer. Make that commitment. Say, God, I want you to make me into the Catholic man or wife or husband or wife that you want me to be. And I'm willing to cooperate with your grace and get this done. And then virtues are habits. They are dispositions. So initially there's going to be a lot of friction and resistance, as it is with any new habit. But with God's grace, you can get through that. But then eventually that it turns the other way around, right? That you build that virtuous habit. And then, so striving to live virtuously is about making what is good for you at first accessible. And that's difficult, right? That's where that early friction comes in. But then through continued perseverance and practice, what becomes accessible eventually becomes effortless. That's the key. That virtuous behavior is first to make the good accessible, but then effortless over time, like a good trained musician, right? Very tough at first to learn a musical instrument, but over time you gain proficiency. And not only when it becomes effortless is that a cool thing, but there's a level of an enjoyment, of delight in the good. Same thing, right? Okay, eating healthy, difficult at first, but eventually it becomes effortless and you feel really good when you're eating healthy. Exercise at first, difficult. Yes, certainly if you've not been doing it for a while. But then you get to this point where it's the opposite. You feel bad if you don't exercise. And you delight in the feelings of exercise and going to the gym. So just keep that in mind, that in the long term, it starts to smooth out. And that once these habits become ingrained, it's not always going to be as difficult as it is starting.
Just a quick tip. What I have found to be incredibly helpful for myself is starting my day after I do my morning offering prayer is to pray a memorare. And I always ask Mary to not for something to make my life easier, but I ask her to give me a heart like hers. And over time, I've noticed that difference. Or I've asked for the 7 gifts of the Holy Spirit. And these things, one, prayer aligns our will, better aligns our will to God, but it opens us to receive God's graces. So yes, pray.
Amen.
And do you have anything else? Because I have one last thing that I wanted to say.
I will just say, if there's any husbands listening, good to have you, of course, and that on my podcast, I obviously talk a lot more about this stuff, specifically to men, so you might be interested in that. Just head over to the Pat Flynn Show.
Yep.
Check that out.
Okay. And then I would like to say, and we'll talk more about this in the next episode, but if you are a wife who does not have a husband who is yet acting like a Catholic husband and a Catholic man, my advice to you, or if they are on their way to acting like this and they are not quite there yet, is model the Catholic woman. And pray through any suffering that you might feel. My biggest hang up over time is, am I getting enough respect? Me. And it would make me lash out at Pat whenever he fell short of what my expectations were of him. And it was very unfair of me to do so. But I wasn't exemplifying what, the Catholic womanhood in any of this. Now, of course, there were many years where I didn't even know there was a Catholic womanhood. But, as I've started along this path, the more I fulfill what I am supposed to be, what God made me to be, it helps Pat be who he is. And the more Pat is as a Catholic man helps me become a better Catholic wife and woman. So we feed off of each other. So your life as a shining light in the dark world for Christ goes much farther, right? You can help your husbands just by being a better woman, a better Catholic woman, and stronger in that regard. So we'll talk more about what it actually means to be a Catholic woman, Catholic womanhood, and wifedom. I don't know if that's.
I like it.
In the next episode, we'll pair these back to back. So not to leave the women hanging, but share this. Listen to this yourself. Share it with your husband or a Catholic man in your life, or somebody that you would like to be a Catholic man.
Yeah, I'm trying to think how to share this without it being like, hey, I think you need that.
I know. Just have it.
That's not what this episode is about. Right?
No, you know what I like.
Not about that.
No, but you know what I like is we've referenced this movie a few times, but we saw it kind of recently. Is in My Big Fat Greek Wedding. Mm-hmm. The man is the head of the household, but the wife is the neck. Mm-hmm. Right? She can turn the head. So just play this in the background. Right. If you need to just gently introduce some of these concepts. Gentle is and meek and humble is.
Again, I just want to emphasize that this was something I had to grow into. Right, this is something I had to learn.
No amount of nagging on my part would have done this, because I have told Pat over time to man up, and instead of just incited a fight.
Yeah, no. So let me be very clear that this was something that God did for me and in me, and that I'm so glad that happened. Not only because is our marriage better than ever, our lives are better than ever, still challenging. So I just want to be so clear about that, is that this is something that I had to learn and grow into. But the flourishing that comes out of this is so beautiful, and that our marriage has never been better. I think we both agree on that.
Absolutely.
And that there's harmony. There's beautiful, beautiful harmony in this. Everything that I ever wanted out of a marriage, that I thought, and what's good for a marriage. When you see it, you see these beautiful couples who've been married for so long, and they just exude love and joy, and you can see the light coming out of their eyes. Like, man, I want that. Mm-hmm. This is how you get it. Because anything that I thought going into marriage, I was wrong.
And we'll talk more about how wrong I was next week. So it's not just Pat saying that he had to grow into this. I certainly did. I had a lot of juvenile tendencies to grow out of, and I could only do that through the grace of God and his guidance from the Catholic Catechism.
Cool.
So read the Catechism and then subscribe so that you don't miss next week's episode where we talk about the Catholic womanhood. All right. Until next time, everyone. Don't forget to head over to thecatholicmama.com to get your free copy of How to Talk to Your Kids About God. This handy little ebook will teach you how to broach the topic of God with your children, or how to respond to your kids when they want to talk about God, as well as give you answers to 7 of the trickiest questions about the faith that Christian parents face. You'll love the easy to understand grown-up answers, the pared down but not talked down answers you can share with your kids, plus recommended resources if you'd like to deepen your understanding of the topic. Get yours free at thecatholicmama.com.
God's beloved, I'm Annabelle Mosley, author, professor of theology, and host of Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. I invite you to listen in and find inspiration along this sacred journey we're traveling together to make our lives a masterpiece and, with God's grace, become saints. Join me, Annabelle Mosley, for Then Sings My Soul and Destination Sainthood on WCAT Radio. God bless you. Remember, you're never alone. God is always with you.
For listening to a production of WCAT Radio. Please join us in our mission of evangelization. And don't forget, love lifts up when knowledge takes flight.